Uncharted is brought to us by Ruben Fleischer, starring Tom Holland, Mark Wahlberg, and Antonio Banderas, among others. And it's an adaptation of the video game series centering around Nathan Drake, who's a young explorer searching for various treasures that have been lost throughout the centuries, with his partner Victor Sullivan, or Sully, while also trying to fend off a group of ragtag treasure hunters who are trying to use it for their own personal gain. This movie has been long in development, probably since the year 2008, and at one point Mark Wahlberg was originally attached to play Nathan Drake. And I find that interesting because I think Mark Wahlberg looks a lot more like Nathan Drake personally. We'll get to the casting in a little bit. As far as my history with Uncharted, I've done a video on the fourth one, which is actually right there. I think it's the best game of that series so far, and Uncharted as a series in general I think is really, really fun, and I have a great time playing it whenever I'm in the mood for it. I like the whole vibe that it gives off as the lighthearted adventure similar to Indiana Jones, Tomb Raider, and among other films like it. They use historical figures and events, taking some creative liberties with them while making it their own story. For casual audiences who aren't really that familiar with it, I could see why they would do that, and that might bother some people who are really into history. I don't really see it as much of a problem, but that's besides the point. Now that Uncharted is finally a movie, video game to movie adaptations don't really have a good reputation because they often, I think, get a lot of people who don't know what they're doing, at least as far as I could tell. Granted, I haven't seen too many video game to movie or television adaptations before, and that's mostly because of their track record, but the only one that I can name off the top of my head is the Mortal Kombat movie, which came out about a year ago. Even though I'm not really a fan of Mortal Kombat, I've never played it actually. Much better than I expected, and I think that maybe Hollywood is starting to catch on to how to get people who know what they're doing when it comes to this particular genre, because while this movie isn't exactly groundbreaking or original, I would go as far as to say it's a pretty entertaining and effective crowd pleaser. Certain people are going to be turned off by it. Not much originality and not too many surprises are thrown in the mix, especially if you're like me, familiar with the game storylines. There's not going to be a whole lot that will really surprise you except certain changes that are made in this movie. If you're a diehard Uncharted fan, you're probably not going to like certain choices that are made. The plot is very, very similar to what we've seen before. There's a certain artifact or certain area that is out there somewhere that hasn't been discovered yet, and someone like Nathan Drake has to look for it while also fending off a certain bad guy. And what they're searching for in this movie is basically something from the Voyage of Magellan. There's a certain area where he supposedly died. I believe it was in the Philippines. If anyone who's watching this is familiar with history, please politely correct me in the comment section if I got that wrong. But the whole thing goes is that apparently he discovered some buried treasure in this area and they confiscated it, and certain ships got left behind with the gold as his captain continued the voyage to go back to their home country. I'll get to the similarities in a minute. The way it plays out, it's almost similar to Uncharted 4, where Nathan and Sam have to find Henry Avery's treasure, known as the Gunsway heist, because they find the two ships in this hidden cave somewhere on the island. And Nate's brother Sam, as we see in the beginning of the movie when they're kids, they have immediate interest in it right from the get-go when they break into this museum in Boston. Fast forward to about 15 years later, Nathan Drake is a bartender in New York City where he meets Victor Sullivan, and he's starting to feel his way of becoming a thief, and Sullivan points out certain things that he's doing wrong or doing right. And Sullivan right off the bat is portrayed as a pretty self-centered and greedy guy who only looks out for himself. Nathan Drake is very eager for adventure while also still waiting for word from his brother to come back, who has disappeared for so long and sent him so many postcards throughout the years. And they reveal in the movie that Sullivan was there when Sam got killed, apparently by who's later revealed to be the main antagonist. If you've played the Uncharted games, you know how that plot point goes, and they make it clear at the end of the movie that Sam is still alive, and I had a feeling that he was going to be. And the actor who played young Sam Drake, he almost sounds like the exact same actor who played the young Sam Drake in A Thief's End, and it turns out it's not actually him. But as I was listening to him, I thought, if he's not the same actor, I'd be really shocked. And interestingly enough, Nolan North has a small appearance in this movie, and they treat it like a Stan Lee cameo. He's this guy sitting on this lounge chair on the beach after Nate and Chloe have fallen off of that plane. Nate tells him what happened, and Nolan North says, you know, a similar thing like that happened to me one time. If Troy Baker was in there though, oh god, I would have freaked out. But as far as the casting goes, Tom Holland as Nathan Drake, I wouldn't have necessarily had him to be my front runner. His performance in this movie is very similar to how he is as Peter Parker in the MCU. That being said though, I think he brings a lot of charm and charisma to the role, and his back and forth with Mark Wahlberg is surprisingly really entertaining to see. And it's clear, as you watch the movie, that he does a lot of his own stunts, just like he did as Spider-Man when it wasn't CGI. But the fact that he's actually doing a lot of these things, that's a lot more than I could say for many actors in his position. The only other actor I could think of off the top of my head who does most of his own stunts is Tom Cruise. 2 Toms with 1 stone. That sounded a lot better in my head. I don't know why I just said that. As for Mark Wahlberg, I really like the guy as an actor. He's one of my all-time favorites. But again, I don't know if I would have picked him as Victor Sullivan. In fact, as I said earlier, I think he looks a lot more like Nathan Drake, because at one point, he was originally supposed to play Nathan Drake. He doesn't quite sell it for me as Victor Sullivan. He's basically just doing the Mark Wahlberg thing like we saw in The Happening, the whole, what? No! It didn't take me out of the movie, but after a while I did say, Mark, can you stop it with the Happening shtick already? Even though he's shown to be a very selfish and greedy person, I do like the arc that he experiences where he becomes a little bit more caring for Nathan Drake and how he decides to let go of his greed when he tosses that bag of gold at the main antagonist and saves Nathan from falling off of the chopper. And I also really like Sophia Ali as Chloe Fraser. I think she's a young action actress in the making, after seeing what she does in this movie, and if she's gonna show up in a future Uncharted sequel, I would not have a problem with it. And I like that they don't make her to be a reformed person, because she clearly does like Nathan Drake as a person, but at the end she's really looking out for her own interests. Similar to how she was in the second Uncharted game, when Nate went to save her on the train, and Chloe just told him off, pointing her gun at him saying, I don't need any saving, you go be with Elena. You made your choice. And when she decides to go after Magellan's treasure with the coordinates that Nate supposedly left, he became wise to her act after she steals the cross from him and gives her the wrong coordinates. That was a Bruce Almighty reference in case you didn't get that. As for Antonio Banderas, he's a likable actor and I've liked him in some other movies I've seen him in, but his character is pretty one-dimensional and very basic and standard. I understand the motivation for his character. He comes from a long line of people who wanted to find that treasure, because if I remember correctly, he's descended from one of the 18 explorers that was with Magellan on his voyage, and they lost the chance to find the treasure, so he wants to correct what they didn't do in the past. But then the main antagonist, can't remember her name, when she's revealed to be the villain after she slits his throat, she's a former associate, I believe, of Victor Sullivan. She's just even more one-dimensional than Antonio Banderas' character is. And I think she's loosely based off of Nadine Ross in the 4th Uncharted, who was played by Laura Bailey, but not quite as threatening and scary. And the things that they recreated and adapted into this movie, there's certain story and action elements that they adapted from these games into this movie, like the plane sequence, which we've all seen in the trailers, almost verbatim taken right out of Uncharted 3, when Nate goes after this group of people that are trying to drop supplies over this certain area, and when he and Chloe are in the sewers trying to figure out this puzzle, similar to when Nate and Flynn were trying to break into this museum in Turkey in the second Uncharted. The helicopters taking the ships off of the island onto their ship nearby, just like in the first Uncharted when they take the golden casket from El Dorado in the first game, along with Sam and Nathan Drake as young kids, and with the 2 ships inside the treasure cave, just like in Uncharted 4, when they first express interest in the Gunsway heist by Henry Avery. As someone who's played the games pretty religiously at certain moments, it's a faithful adaptation / recreation of those plot elements. For some people that might bother them, I didn't really have a problem with it. And as far as him jumping on the car with Chloe, who's in the car, and they just stick to the edge of the car like it's nothing, that would not happen. Never in a million years. Let alone 2 helicopters pulling up these 2 shipwrecks. There's no way that would happen. But at the same time, I was able to let it go, so I didn't really care. Based on the film's ending and 2 post-credit scenes, if there turns out to be a sequel to this, I would not be shocked. Because the way this film handles the characters, I could easily see a series coming out of this. Hopefully much better than from what I've seen of the Resident Evil series. Ugh. And maybe it'll be the first video game adaptation movie series to actually be watchable or somewhat legit. And the fact that they're adapting Last of Us into an HBO series, since both of those properties are from Naughty Dog Studios, maybe something good will come out of it. We'll see. I still retain the idea that Uncharted is cinematic enough as a game that it doesn't necessarily need to be made into a movie, but if they can get people behind the camera who know how to make something legit, I'm all for it, especially when it comes to The Last of Us. Even though I would say you don't necessarily need to make it into a movie or a television show, I could easily see that being adapted in live action in some capacity. At the end of the day, I think Uncharted, like I said, is a really decent crowd pleaser. Not really original and mind-blowing, but an overall pretty effective good time. And if you're someone who's not familiar with the games in general, I think that you're gonna have a good time with this one. And Tom Holland, being a box office draw that he is, especially after Spider-Man, it's a fairly good gateway for casual audiences to get into Uncharted. What are you guys' thoughts on the movie? Do you love it, like it, think it's alright, or do you hate it? Whatever the case is, comment below and tell me your thoughts, and I'll see you guys in the next one.